All right, I think let's get started. Just because we're cognizant of your time. I know everybody is quite busy, so we'll jump in here, and I know that there will be some stragglers that will join us in a moment. But first off, thank you all for joining. For those that I don't know, my name is Adam Damian. I work at M13. And I'm on our propulsion team, which hopefully for the founders on the call know what that means, but work with a number of our portfolio companies and our launchpad companies as well. But I'm thrilled to have with us Ed Lee, and this whole session, as you saw from the marketing materials that went out, is really around unlocking value through price. And I think as we work with portfolio companies, it's something that is coming up more and more recently. But what we also find is it's not something that founders necessarily think about a lot. So generally, it's based on perhaps your business model or your P&L or a competitive data point out there. But there's a lot of value to be unlocked through pricing actions and all kinds of great stuff that Ed will be talking about later in the session. So I want to intro him in a second, but just in terms of our time together today, we have about 45 minutes. Ed will go through a presentation, and then as you're sort of listening, definitely drop questions into the chat function, and then we'll have time at the end to answer those. So I'll field those questions, and then we'll go from there. So really looking forward to this session. Thank you, Ed, for joining us. For those that don't know, Ed is the founder of HelloAdvisr and focuses on pricing and monetization for startups. He's an LA native, passionate about the ecosystem here, but draws on his pricing experience from early stage all the way through to Fortune 500. So experts in this area, and I personally am eager to learn a lot from him today, and hopefully you all are as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Ed. Thank you again for joining, and for participants, definitely drop questions into the chat, and we'll answer those at the end.
Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate it. And I want to just another thank you to M13 for having me. Today is my last talk on at least this type of talk or workshop for 2020. So really excited to be here and be here with you. So I know we're going to be covering quite a lot. There's probably going to be things that are going to come up after today. So if we don't get to your question, if a question comes afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to answer those questions even after today's session. And here's my email just for your reference. So as Adam mentioned, I'm the founder of HelloAdvisr. We are a growth consultancy based here in Los Angeles, but working with startups at all stages here in Southern California, Silicon Valley, New York, as well as in Europe. Have spent most of my professional career in pricing, monetization, and growth, and specifically looking at platforms, marketplaces, CPG, e-commerce companies, and so on and so forth. With that, I mean, one of the big things that, just kind of echoing what Adam just said, through the work that I have done, the work that our team has done, really unlocking hundreds of millions of dollars in value for stakeholders and for companies and for founders and leadership teams by looking at pricing, not just more strategically and tactically, but just more thoughtfully. And I'll start to talk a little bit more about that. So let me just start with my Thanksgiving. And I hope everyone had a fantastic Thanksgiving, hopefully with loved ones and with friends. And it was a really safe and joyous time for you. But let me just talk a little bit about my Thanksgiving. So I'm based here in Los Angeles. We've had another kind of round of safer at homes, restaurants, indoor and outdoor dining is now closed. So really not that there was that much outdoor stuff that we could do or I could do, but certainly come the holidays, the city was definitely clamping down. But I did have to go to the grocery store. So got in the car and I just happened to get into a car accident. Now, thankfully, no one got hurt. And again, it was a rear end, so someone hit the rear of my car, and again, it was a very solid hit. And I thought, oh my gosh, one, thankfully no one got hurt, but second, I was thinking to myself, oh, I wonder if the car is going to still go. So I get out of the car, and I was just expecting, half the car to be, on the road. And then I look at my bumper, and there is a dent, probably the size of a nickel. I'm like, okay, ease of mind, fantastic, great. Now comes the fun part. Now the question is, what do I do? Now, cosmetically, it looks like a dent. It looks like a dent, it looks like just a simple bumper replacement or bumper change and so on. But when you start to kind of go down, anyone who's ever been in a car accident or a fender bender or whatever you want to call it knows that the process starts to become far more complex than it seems to be. So in my case, the number of questions that you start to ask is, do you go through insurance or out of pocket? Well, what body shop am I going to use, if I'm going to use any body shop at all? Am I going to replace just the bumper? What if there's additional damage? Because a bumper is no longer just a bumper anymore, right? There's, yes, the cosmetic pure part of it, but then there is an impact bar. There are the parking sensors. There are the connectors to the trunk and the other base in the body of the vehicle. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And so what looks like a little dent, very cosmetic, something the size of a nickel, starts to have and raise a number of important questions, which again is an important decision that needs to be made. And when I thought about this, and strangely enough, I was thinking particularly about this, I was like, this is something I definitely want to share, because it was it was a great analogy to how pricing, what could seem very cosmetic and a very surface level, is that when you start to peel away at the layers, there's a degree of complexity and a series of decisions that need to be made that ultimately impact what happens as a result. So we're going to start to get into that today. So today, what we're going to be uncovering is, number one, just really how do we start to unlock value with price and understanding what that actually means, especially in my world and in the work that we do with startups. The second thing we're going to be talking about are the three principles to pricing, and three things that I'm hoping that that you're able to take away and that you're able to share with your respective teams after the workshop today. And then finally, we're going to be talking about promotions and discounting. And I think it's really an apt time, especially given that we've just had Black Friday, we've had Cyber Monday, we have year end and the start of the year. So again, it's a good time to start talking and thinking about promotions and discounts from a pricing context. So let me just kind of start off with how I like to frame pricing for founders and for startup leadership teams. And the way that I like to help and I like to kind of articulate pricing is that it is an exercise for a leadership team, for a founder, to be intellectually honest about how well you know your customer, your business, and your product. And the reason for that is because pricing is an intersection of all of those three elements. And how well we know those three elements will also be a reflection of how much work that we put into our pricing and whether or not we are helping our customers answer the fundamental question that they're looking to answer, which is your product or service worth it? Now, again, what does that actually mean? And I'm sure you're sitting there asking me that, thinking that as you're watching this. And really, what does that mean? Is to start off is really watch out for the mortuary, right? You have seen those type of stats before in terms of what are some of the top reasons why new ventures fail. And one of the things that is oftentimes overlooked is number 5, which is pricing. Now, as we go through this session together today, I'm going to link in the part around the no market need, as well as run out of cash, and also about being outcompeted as we continue on and talk about this. But number 5 is around pricing, and it's just understanding how important it is for a founder and for a startup to not get pricing right, but really starting to work on pricing, because pricing is in and of itself evolutionary, it's iterative, it'll constantly change. Now, we've done a lot of research, and we do a lot of research with startups and founders of all stages, from pre-seed to quote unquote mature startups that are at that Series D type of level. And one of the things that we find is that for more than a third of the startups that we have spoken to generally find that it is very, very strategically important. And strategically important because the CEO or the founder typically still retains control of all strategic pricing, and actually even the tactical pricing decisions that the company is actually going to make. But even though that more than 3/4 of founders or startups really focus in on pricing, is that less than a quarter actually have a real process in terms of how they manage their pricing within their teams and their organizations. And this is important, not just to create additional layers of bureaucracy, to bring in a consulting process per se, but really in terms of how do I make decisions not just for today, but how do I make decisions for my product, for my company tomorrow? And for anyone who has whose startup has been around for at least 12 months knows that a lot of things can change in 12 months, and a lot of things have changed. Your startups, your products, your services probably doesn't look, and is definitely not in the market quite the same as it was 6 months ago, as it was 12 months ago, most definitely, right? So what do we do? How do we adapt? What's the process in which we take? And quite frankly, a lot of startups might have a price, but to make that next pricing decision is very much far more in the dark. And the impact of that is that for most startups that we speak to, and at least through our research, less than a third actually understand and know their customers' true willingness to pay. Now, the impact on that has multiple dimensions. Number 1 is obviously the financial. It means that we are potentially leaving money on the table. Number 2, it also means that how are we actually connecting our product or service to our target market and our target customers? Do we really understand what is not just driving them to use our product, to love our product, maybe even love our brand, but what does that actually mean in a monetary sense? Very rarely does a customer or shopper disconnect a product or service to a price. More times than not, there is an association and a contextualization of your product or service and brand in the context of price. So when we're looking at a stat like this, it's really telling in terms of what we're actually doing, what kind of value we're actually unlocking in terms of our customers. So again, what are we trying to do with our pricing is really trying to unlock all the levers that we have available to us in order to capture more value in the market. And so I always like to do this simple exercise with founders in terms of understanding what our dynamics are. And so I always start off with the simple revenue equation, because it's very, as simple as this may be, it's very telling in terms of the fact that we have 2 levers that we're trying to really drive. Obviously the volume, the volume lever, where we're trying to grow that to help us to scale, to penetrate markets. But at the same time, we also have pricing as a lever to try to influence our customers, our markets, in terms of expressing value in a monetary sense. And so part of my profile, I used to be at LG Electronics, and we, amongst our many competitors, one of our biggest competitors was Apple. And Apple took an entirely different stance in terms of their pricing strategy, in terms of how they were going to get revenue and revenue traction. And it's not that they didn't want scale. Of course, they wanted scale. But at the time when I was at LG, we were the third largest mobile manufacturer in the world, to which we probably had a multiple in terms of units sold relative to Apple at that time. But from a pricing strategy perspective, they had to sell one iPhone relative to, for us at our top of the line, we'd be having to sell about two and a half to equal the amount of revenue that they were generating. If we're talking about profitability, we'd actually have to sell even more, because our costs in terms of selling in, our customer acquisition costs, were actually higher, the trade terms, promotions that we would have to spend. So the nature of our business model and our unit economics were fundamentally different. And again, it was fundamentally different, not because we naturally fell on it, but it was a strategic decision that was made in the past and that wasn't updated relative to where the market was actually going at that time. And this is really, really important when you're actually starting to think about how you're going to leverage both of these levers. And for those that are thinking about, well, I'm going to really drive up that volume, it is always helpful to understand customer acquisition costs. Study after study is showing that the customer acquisition costs are going up anywhere from 50 to 70%, depending on what industry you're going to. So again, it's to find balance in all the levers you have within your toolkit. For those of you that are thinking about pathways to profitability, or really thinking about profitability, and this is certainly one theme that we have been finding in startups, especially in 2020, but actually far into 2019, is this theme about finding profitability and really finding the mechanics to help us get there. Pricing is definitely one way that's going to accelerate that process. Again, when we find in our research, but also other studies from other firms and other academic organizations and institutions, is that if you are able to improve 1% in price, that you can get anywhere from 3 to 5 times greater impact on your bottom line than you can do by increasing 1% in volume in units sold, right? Because pricing goes straight down. Any pricing improvements go straight down to the bottom line. And so it's very, very important to definitely keep that in mind when you're thinking about the levers that you have available to you. The other kind of benefit in terms of unlocking value, especially through pricing, is this interplay, this feedback loop that pricing starts to play, especially when you're working on pricing. So again, pricing isn't siloed. It should not be isolated in the back room of your team or your organization, but it's really how it interplays with different departments and different areas of your business. So of course it influences marketing and sales. So what kind of customers you're going after? What are your marketing assets you're going to be creating? What kind of communication are you going to be trying to develop and to present into the marketplace? And there's the constant feedback loop where if you have a sales team, you have a field sales team, that you hear back from the market, what kind of elements of your pricing strategy that might need to be changed or need to be modified or even optimized even further. From a product perspective, again, you might be wondering, like, what does pricing have to do with product? And one of the things that we find, especially when we're working on the research for new product pricing, or even products that are currently in the market, is that we might discover that that killer feature or that one thing that the product team is working on and working days and nights on might not actually have any monetary value within the market. So this leads to a few different questions for the founder and the leadership team. Number one, do we still invest time and money into developing something that might not influence willingness to pay or change the value paradigm for our customer? Additionally, it also means maybe there's something that our customers still don't understand. And do we have a pathway for them to not only link this product or this feature to a particular use case, but then also interlocking that with the price and having that kind of trifecta of your product, your customer, and your price. And then lastly, of course, finance and how that influences and works with pricing in terms of your financial forecasting, in terms of your business model, in terms of what that cash flow and that sustainability is going to start to look like. So there's this interplay that all starts to work together in terms of kind of what that dynamic looks like. So that pricing doesn't just sit on its own somewhere in a corner. And then lastly, around the value hypothesis, for those that are thinking about product market fit and trying to establish product market fit, whenever anybody asks me, well, how do you know if you have product market fit? I always like to refer them to this Marc Andreessen quote in terms of how he defines or identifies product market fit. And I'll just read it verbatim. And what does he say? He says, the customers are buying the product just as fast as you can make it. Money from customers is piling up in your company checking account. And and this is really telling because product market fit is not mutually exclusive from pricing, right? There has to be an element where we understand what that willingness to pay is going to be, not just in terms of level, but what that offer is going to look like, right? So if you're thinking about product market fit and you're thinking about what kind of levers and dimensions and how you're validating and testing this, it's always helpful to be able to enter in to that equation that you are using where pricing starts to fit into all of this. So let's talk about 3 principles of pricing to really unlock some value. Number 1, pricing is about people. Before we start talking about models, about algorithms, about anything else, pricing is about people. And I like to always express pricing as a test for how well we know our people, our community, our customers, right? And so you probably hear this in probably at least 6 different variations, whether you're talking to a sales expert, a branding expert, a customer success expert, a marketing expert, and so on. Listen to your customers. And I have no doubt that everyone's probably just nodding your head right now saying, of course, Ed, of course we listen to our customers. But again, I say, I always like to add a caveat to that. Because 1, I think the way that we listen to our customers is different depending on what we're trying to learn. And oftentimes what we are hearing or what we're asking our customers or prospective customers has less relevance and less application to pricing. So let me just kind of start off with, this is typically how most startups and most companies kind of think about their customers, is putting them into these buckets and this horizontal kind of line of customer segments. Customer segment 1, 2, male, female, large company, small company, big spender, small spender, so on and so forth. And again, it's helpful because it creates structure. It helps to identify and distinguish and differentiate different type of customers and different type of users. And so it becomes very, very helpful. But from a pricing perspective, and especially when we think about actionable pricing for startups, this becomes less relevant, where I oftentimes see these customer segmentations and these buyer personas that a startup will create, and it kind of gets shelved, and it doesn't become as actionable. And so for us, when we're thinking about pricing and we're thinking about our customers, we like to think about our customers in terms of layers, or these customer rings. And we like to think about them in terms of different rings going from the inside, working your way out. And you're thinking about, in the center, your tribe. Those are those customers that are extremely loyal, where your product can break every single day, but they are entirely bought into your mission. And they are willing to pay, and they're willing to support you and the company and the product to get it to the vision that you have created and you've set out. As you start to go to those various rings outside of your tribe or that core is now when you're starting to have different type of dimensions in terms of price sensitivity, types of benefits, in terms of value proposition, price knowledge, price comparisons, and so on. And the further and further out you go, the dimensions of what they're asking of you is going to start to change. Now, this is not to suggest to avoid them. It is to get to a point where we have so many different layers that we are more tactically and more in a more focused way, focusing on different layers of our customer base. And so when we're thinking about some of the most successful startups, and you can define success in any way you want, but in this case, let's think about scale and market penetration. And you think of a company like Slack, which is now, at least has been recently announced to be joining the Salesforce family. Slack was a great example of using this, this layer customer ring principle, where for many, many years of their early life, they stuck around in their first one or two rings. Even though the application use cases could probably go to various different rings and layers, like small businesses, SMBs, even Fortune 500 companies, they were very, very focused in on a very narrow customer ring for a number of years, making sure that they are penetrating and executing there to make sure that not only the use case, but also the actual willingness to pay is actually developed in that area before they start to move on. And one of the things that we typically find, even for companies that go on to grow and to scale, is that the number of rings that you actually end up penetrating is a lot smaller than you originally kind of hypothesize or assume is going to be the case, which is absolutely fine because it creates far more focus, not just in terms of your go-to-market, but also how you're pricing. So again, one of the examples that I like to always share is one of our clients. They are in the dental alignment space. You probably have already heard of one of the big incumbents, Invisalign. There are a number of new entrants, big and small, very well resourced in the marketplace. And again, I'll let you take your guess in terms of who our client is. But one of the things that they're trying to understand is, in this crowded market, how do we create differentiation? So it wasn't just about how do we package our offer, how do we just price our product, but how do we create differentiation amongst other things, including our technology, including our customer success and customer service, but also in terms of our packaging and pricing. And so through some extensive research that spanned over 2 months, close to almost 3, is that what we started to discover is that the customer profile wasn't really anything that we thought it was going to be, not particularly for this offer and the way that they were trying to deliver teeth alignment into the marketplace. And so actually one of the things that we were able to identify, especially for our particular, ring 1, ring 2 type of customer, was that they created association to teeth alignment to their mobile provider or their cell phone provider. So the more premium the mobile operator that they use, the entirely different type of dimension that they were creating, an association that they were creating relative to teeth alignment. And so, yeah, one could say, well, of course, if they're on a more premium plan for a mobile operator, they have more disposable income. Actually, we found that not necessarily be the case, at least not for our target segment, that it wasn't necessarily always the highest income bracket, but it was really how they perceived certain levels of quality for certain dimensions. So they thought of teeth alignment closer to a utility than they did for other medical expenses. And that changed the dynamic of not only how we were going to package it, but also in terms of our price point. And that, in effect, we were talking about double-digit shifts in terms of what kind of revenue potential there was for a particular customer. So let's talk about principle number 2. Number two, pricing is a series of decisions. And we've kind of talked about this at the start of this talk. But let's kind of talk about what that actually means. So, of course, the first decision that we want to make is, what is the price? Is it $9.99? Is it $9,099? What is it, right? And that's a perfectly valid and legitimate question. But typically what we find is that, especially for companies that haven't really worked on pricing, this is typically one of the last things that we are really asking, because we're trying to understand various different dimensions. Now, one of the things that I often hear is, well, Ed, you know what, I can just build a simple demand curve, and I'm going to use a demand curve to figure out what I should be pricing. And that's perfectly fine. And I'm sure you've heard or seen, or maybe you've done something like this yourself. You know, so for this particular product, let's say it's priced at $30. We run a few Facebook ads or some sort of ads to get it out there. We discover we have about a 5% conversion rate on 1,000 impressions or 1,000 views. Gives us about a volume of 50, gives us a revenue of about 1,500. We keep running this test. It's like, you know, because we make assumptions on elasticity and other elements of our customer base, and eureka, we have our optimal price of $15, which is perfectly fine. Now, the challenge to this and challenge to this method is that we're making a few different assumptions. Number one is that our product, the way that it was actually presented, is being presented to the right customers. The second is that the starting point of $30 is actually the kind of the right price, right? And so again, trying to understand that dimension as well. So there's several different assumptions that we're really making that can also, where we're starting to lose kind of potential value. If I took that example that I mentioned earlier of teeth alignment, we would have gone nowhere close to the prices that we actually ended up going to market with had we used this. Because the type of customers and what their understanding was entirely different, right? So again, a series of different decisions. So one framework that we like to use is the 5 W's of pricing. This is a very simple compartmentalized way of looking at not just to assess your current pricing, but also identifying where gaps exist that can be kind of red signals in terms of where potential challenges or issues may exist in terms of pricing. So let me just start off with the why. So the why is really the strategy. It's right. Why are we going to price the way that we're going to price? What is our pricing and the pricing decisions that we're trying to make today? What is that going to help us achieve as far as our business and our business objectives? The who, and we've talked a little bit about this already. Who are our offers for? Who are the targets? How specific is it? And what are their value drivers? What is really driving them to equate our product to their use case, to the prices that we want to take to market? The what, obviously it's the offer and the pricing and the price points that we're going to present to our customers. Then there's the when. When are we going to potentially monetize? It doesn't have to be immediately. Maybe we have a free trial. Maybe we have freemium. Maybe there's other type of time constraints that we need to embed in terms of our offering. And then there's the where. There could be different channels. So if you have in-app purchases, maybe you have different pricing by where you're acquiring customers. So if they are downloading your app and subscribe for a membership, or I'm sorry, they subscribe to your service or they sign up for a membership through your website, they get a different price than if they go through the App Store, because you want to charge differently because there's an App Store fee. And so that can also start to change the dynamics of those type of pricing. So again, it's the what, but if we start to think about it and think about it in design context, right? We start with our what, right? But then it's their why. Do we have 3 tiers? right? Do we want to go multi-tier? Do we have a free tier and a free element that's involved? Why are we going to offer it in this way, right? There's the who. Who is each of those tiers for, or the different levels for? Who are we designing it for, and how do we know? And are we making sure that the value drivers are upfront and clear and present for those customers? There's the where. Again, in this case, if we're thinking about software, some sort of or a SaaS type of product or a subscription product, maybe there needs to be a human touch. So do they need to schedule a demo? When you are having that demo, what is the offer going to look like? What type of discounts or negotiated pricing is going to potentially be involved? And then finally, the when here, talking about a 7-day trial, an annualized price. You know, for those of you that are thinking about retention and trying to manage churn, again, going to annualized pricing versus offering month-to-month pricing certainly improves retention, reduces churn. Flip side of that is potential friction at the earlier stages of conversion. But again, it's understanding and making those decisions and designing for that accordingly. And in the case of one of our clients, an EdTech company, they're trying to establish a few of these different elements in terms of what they've actually designed. So one is to make sure that customers have a clear expectation that they're paying at least about $100 or $99 per month. The fact that there is a billed on a month-to-month basis. It's also used to also screen out and to filter out those prospects that may not have the same expectation of paying at least $100 for this particular solution, right? It is really designed for a particular type of customers. It's also expressing how to think about software like this. So it's in terms of number of classes, the number of camps, the number of aftercare, and to create some degree of transparency in terms of the price. And that adds that context in terms of what that $99 or anything even above that will start to mean for them. And then of course the where, requesting access. Again, it's not entirely DIY. And so there is going to be some degree of onboarding and some sort of human touch that's also involved. The last principle that I want to share with you today is about pricing. And the thought, I'm thinking about your pricing as something that's designed almost like a product. And so I talked about Slack earlier, and let's take a look at the price, the pricing page at Slack. And it's kind of bringing all of these decisions together. So in the case of Slack, their packaging strategy has 4 different layers. They have a free layer where they want to reduce that entry point. They have the different price levels where they have obviously that free, but then the first level is at $667. But then the next level, which is a plus, is an 87.4% price increase. It's not a clean 50%. It's not a clean 20%, right? It's an 87.4%, which again, I know that Slack actually did quite a bit of pricing research when they were designing this package, this offer for their target customers. Also thinking about what's also involved in terms of how you're getting your customers to go from one level to another. So one of the things that Slack was really concerned about or wanted customers to be concerned about was in terms of message history. And so for the free user, you can stay on Slack. You can stay on Slack forever for free. But after 10,000 messages, the history is gone unless you're on a paid package. And really one of the things that they played into is a degree of behavioral economics, which is loss aversion, and that people are more willing to pay to prevent loss than pay for an added gain. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look into the research around loss aversion and pricing and conversion, and they've really played into that. And so even though, and I saw some funny stat around this, that for those that actually have 10,000 messages, that about 15% or something like that of those messages are things that are not really relevant to the company, at least historically, in terms of like where we're going to lunch, where we're going to happy hour when we're doing that sort of thing, what are we doing for holiday, those type of messages all get stored. And yet, again, it is in the fear of not having that one important message is enough to start to say and start to drive that willingness to pay into a higher tier. And then the other elements to this, and this will be a good segue to the last part, is around promotions and discounts. Is there going to be pricing promotions and pricing discounts? Is there going to be retention pricing when it's time to not just only to renew, but is there going to be cross-selling or upselling? Then finally, is there ancillary product pricing, right? I may be a shoe brand, but I also may sell socks, or I may sell aftercare service. What am I going to be pricing around that to have the kind of the totality of our offer? So let me just quickly talk about promotions and I'll jump into questions really quickly, right? Obviously, holiday shopping 2020 looked nothing like this. Yes, there was still holiday shopping. Yes, there was still Black Friday and Cyber Monday. It just looked very, very different. For those of you that did promotions, that did Black Friday, Cyber Monday, hopefully it was very successful and that it was able to help you achieve the things that you were looking to achieve. But again, pricing is promotions is a very powerful pricing tool, and it's a very important kind of pricing mechanism, especially if we do it thoughtfully and we do it strategically. So lesson number one, or objective number one for promotions is really to make sure that you're setting out clear objectives. In our research, we find that about 16% of startups feel that their promotions and discounts are actually effective, which is kind of a telltale sign, right? Is that there's something about how they've gone to market with their promotions that wasn't driving the objectives they were looking for. And again, we know how time intensive preparing promotions are. It's also very expensive, not just in terms of potential revenue loss, but also the cost that's also involved in running these. So setting and defining those clear objectives up front and having a clear promotion strategy is absolutely critical, because now we understand what kind of levers and dimensions that we're going to be designing through our promotions and through our discounts. Number two, promote in layers. Again, not everyone necessarily has to get the same promotion. Also, not everyone has the same level of price sensitivity. If we understand our different layers and our different customer rings, we can define and design promotions that really tap into the nuances between those different layers. Right? So we can discount by shopper behavior. We can also expand the range of benefits that go beyond price. It doesn't have to always be a price discount, right? So it could be free samples for anybody on our mailing list, but our prices remain the same, and that's only exclusive during this promotional period. It has access to exclusives, like you could only buy this one particular color for the next 48 hours because you are a part of our community, or you're on our mailing list, you follow us on social. So there's all of these different things that doesn't have to mean a 50% discount, right? But the only way that we can design that for our promotions is understanding our layers and understanding what our objectives actually are. Presentation and communication matters. Right. And so when we're talking about our promotions and we're talking about promotions and discounts, it is very contextual. In our experience, very rarely do customers purely think about promotions in mathematical terms. They certainly think about it, and it sets an anchor for their buying, but it is their decision is not isolated to that mathematical decision or that cost savings. Right? So it's definitely important to understand and create that context of what they're getting today, what they might be getting tomorrow, and so on and so forth. So it absolutely matters in terms of how you're presenting your pricing and how you're communicating your pricing through the promotions. Lastly, kind of watching out for longer term effects, right? So it's that loyalty trap, thinking about your promotional economics. Again, it is not just simply about 50% discounts, but starting to kind of build that and start to build that together. And then just one last point is you are you, so do it your way. So this Black Friday, I think one of the more interesting Black Friday events that I saw was by Allbirds. And contrary to what everyone else did, they decided to increase their price. And they increased their price on all of their products for $1 for Black Friday, to which they were going to donate the $1. And again, part of it has to do with their business objective, of which one of it is to be environmentally conscious. And so they were going to donate that price increase for a charitable cause. So again, you can be using pricing to go beyond just simply that promotion, but linking it to your pricing, your larger business objectives. So again, the final word is really around defending your value, and finding and using your pricing, designing your pricing, taking it to market with the purpose of defending the incredible innovation and creativity that you're spending countless hours in your life kind of dedicating to that. So with that, let me end here. I know I've kind of slipped into my kind of Q&A period, so I will be more than happy to stick around. And again, there's my email for those of you that have any other kind of follow-up questions, assuming that you have to jet off immediately.
Awesome. Ed, this is great. Thank you. A couple of things that I loved is the idea that pricing is iterative and sort of not this set it and forget it, but it evolves with the market and competition. So sort of a living thing, just as you might evolve your product. And it sort of that framework around the concentric circles of your customer and how you might talk about price with each of those. So really appreciate that. We have a couple of questions that popped into the chat that I'd love to go through. So the first is from one of our portfolio companies. And the question is, they have a number of different potential vectors of pricing. So things like user seats, activity on the platform, different optional features and services. Do you have a recommendation around how to leverage those options and how to balance sort of the different pricing configurations and the multiple iterations of those versus sort of simplicity? And how do you optimize and balance those two things?
No, that's a great question. So I'm glad that you're looking at consumption, and it's interesting, like user seats is a very popular one for a lot of subscription businesses and startups. Again, one of the things that you want to think about when you're thinking about users is, number one, is that how they understand the value that they're getting from your product or service? Maybe they aren't really thinking about it, consumption in that way. So I'm looking at the comment here. Maybe it really is about activity and linking it closer to activity type of resources. The other thing about thinking about users and user seats and kind of consumption in that sense is also, is there an element of virality? Meaning, if we are charging on a user seat basis, is there a organic virality that's going to be created by offering it in this way? Or do we have enough engagement touch points to be able to be a catalyst to drive that, that expansion and that expansion revenue within our customers, right? Definitely, I would err on simplicity, but I think the fact that you're asking these questions suggests to me that there's definitely going to be some additional research that's going to be required in terms of where that value is actually being driven from. And quite frankly, as you start to move up, assuming that you have different plans and you have different packages, that it can actually increase in terms of the number of different kind of metrics, in terms of price metrics, user seats, activities, that you can actually use. So you can actually start to shift, going from consumption like user seats to more capabilities, where actually, if you're on the most premium plan, the capability is you have access to Adam's primary like expert workshops for the next year. And that's just something that you can't just buy just because we have 5 seats. right? And so it's something like that that you can actually start to mix and match. But again, without knowing the exact context, but I would definitely be thinking a little bit more in terms of really where are they getting their where they're getting their value, and then what is going to be kind of that next step if you're thinking about expansion revenue and how that is actually going to be triggered.
Awesome, hopeful. And then second question is around the dangers, and we get this question quite a bit, so it's a great one from one of our portfolio companies, around the dangers of bouncing price around in early days and as you're testing and learning and A/B testing and so on. And specifically, will early users be upset if they then see, price decreases after they've purchased?
That's a great question. So there's two things that I like to kind of caveat my response to. Number one, your early users in particular will be more times than not, I find they're going to be far more understanding in the long term, right? And it's important to help them communicate with them, to be transparent, help them understand why pricing is changing and what you're going to do to ensure that your relationship with them stays strong and solid. The second is, if we're thinking in terms of the longer term game, the early users are going to be relatively a small segment, right, of your eventual ambition of where the market is going to be. And so the trade-off of not being able to test means the trade-off is that we're not learning. And if we're not learning, we're not getting inputs. If we're not getting inputs, the number of variables that we're taking into account to make a better decision goes down, right? And so for us, especially in the earlier days, the trade-off is, yes, there's going to be definitely rumblings, but it's better for us because now we get to ensure not just the price point, but what we're offering to Adam versus Kyndra is absolutely aligned to what they care about, and it aligns to the prices that we're actually offering to them and the way that we're offering it to them. So again, I think it might be a necessary evil, but again, communication and transparency, explain that. But the other part of this, if there was a third dimension to this, is that you definitely do want to, you don't want to have too many prices changes as well. So you definitely want to be structured and methodical as you start to go along, so that you're learning without pissing off too many people as you're going along. So again, you definitely want very structured experimentation. So hopefully that will also ease some of that pain.
Mm-hmm. Hopeful. Awesome. I don't see any additional questions in the chat. If you have them, drop them. But hopefully I'm not talking out of turn. And I think what we've talked about is, obviously this session is to sort of pique your interest and get people sort of thinking about this. But Ed's email is here, and he's open to sort of one-off office hours to really translate a bit of the framework and structure, or theoretical perhaps, into action in a more sort of in smaller sessions with the company. So feel free to reach out to him. And thank you, Ed, for offering that up.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great session, Ed. Really appreciate you taking the time and all of your advice and thinking and frameworks. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.